What's going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guys, Cody and Derek, on with us again. Good friend of the show, Drake Wally from the horseshoehuddle.com. Drake, how are you doing, man? NFL draft almost here. The Colts finally, hopefully, and I think we're all expecting it, finally can get an answer at quarterback.
Yeah, it is. It's only been what 3 months since about 3 months or a little over 3 months since the regular season ended. Feels like 10 years since the quarterback is now the focus of conversation. Obviously, Andrew Luck, we all knew he was going to get picked. Manning obviously was a little bit of a different scenario, but I think this is without question the most important draft in the last 25 years for the Colts. It's very exciting that it's so close to finally being over.
All the speculation we've heard, every single quarterback has been linked to the Colts at one point in time during this offseason. So I'm glad we're going to finally get some finality there and kind of figure out, all right, who's the guy, so we can start talking about one guy instead of 4 to 5 guys. So I'm really looking forward to that. But in today's episode, guys, kind of wanted to really have the conversation around some traits that we really feel like are important for a franchise quarterback, right? Because the Colts are right now, there is a distinct possibility the Colts could have one of 3 quarterbacks available to them at pick number 4. It may not happen that way. They may only be able to pick from 2 or even 1 if quarterbacks go 2, 3. I think it's a worst case scenario there for Indy, but I wanted to kind of talk about what are some traits, as we're looking at the Colts now. They're obviously looking up at all the teams in the AFC that have, not all the teams, but the top teams, they've got their guys. They've got these young quarterbacks. So the Colts are having to compete with all these young teams, including one of their division in Jacksonville. And the Colts just obviously, as every draft, but especially with where Chris Ballard and this regime is right now, they got to hit on this quarterback. They got to get their guy that can compete and get the Colts back to being relevant, guys, because they haven't been relevant in years since Andrew Luck hung it up. So let's start with some of the qualities that you guys think. We'll start with Derek here. What are kind of some of the qualities that you really feel like, if you're looking at a franchise quarterback, the Colts, obviously, we've had 2 guys that have been kind of generational players. There's not really a player in this draft that you say, boom, slam dunk's going to come in and do what Andrew Luck did in 2012. But, what are some of those qualities we noticed, in some of those guys and Manning and Luck and other quarterbacks that you even see today that you think, is so critical to being having a franchise quarterback and being the franchise guy?
Well, I think that when you talk about, Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck and, some of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now, and you talk about Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, some of those guys, particularly Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow, they have that clutch gene. And it's one of those things that it's funny because we mentioned that's kind of like a term when it comes to basketball, but it's kind of transitioned over to the NFL world. But, it's just a guy that when it gets tough, the moment is just not too big for that quarterback. And unfortunately, that's something that you really don't know if that's something that a guy has when he comes into the league until you draft him. You can kind of get an idea of it. You can kind of get an idea of his mindset, but you'll never know what he's going to be like when your team is down 10 entering the 4th quarter, how this guy is going to react. You don't know how that's going to work, but of course, you always knew when Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, and of course when Patrick Mahomes now is on the field, and a couple other guys have the same thing. When they're on the field, that it is never out of the realm of possibility for your team to come back. And that's why, people fear guys like Patrick Mahomes now, because there's never a time when it's not over until that clock hits 0. So it's important to be able to have somebody who is capable of doing that. And when it comes to the some other traits that they have, I think that the most accurate quarterback is the one thing that matters to me the most, is the guy that can make those throws. And that's why I've been a huge advocate of CJ Stroud for the longest time because CJ Stroud is the one quarterback that I feel of every quarterback in this draft class that has no problem making any throw on the football field. There's other guys that can make some throws, but not every quarterback in this draft class can make the same kind of throws that CJ Stroud can. I think there's a couple other aspects, and I think two categories that I'm sure we'll probably get into when we talk about overrated stuff. I think for me personally, athletics and also when it comes to arm strength, I think is a major over representation when it comes to quarterback play. Now, I'm in no way saying that those attributes don't matter and those traits don't matter, but I think that the problem you have is you have a ton of people that are trying to say that if a guy doesn't show that he can't run like Lamar Jackson or, throw the ball like Josh Allen, who can throw it 80 yards while standing still, that they all of a sudden don't have those abilities and therefore they're not a good quarterback. I think the problem is we idolize those qualities too much. Kind of like what we do with the 40 time, right? When it comes to wide receivers and corners, it's a very overblown stat. It's not really something that's that important. If it's bad, then it's bad. But if it's average, then it's not the worst thing in the world, as long as you have other things to back it up. But those are the qualities that I would say makes a really good quarterback, especially the ones that we've known from recent memory.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that, Drake?
Well, it was a wonderful breakdown because just kind of my thoughts on what Derek just said is to each point. We'll start with clutch. There's different levels of it. There's like guys that have no ability to figure out a game time situation, kind of like what Derek was breaking down with Patrick Mahomes, where you're like, oh, this guy's going to throw that touchdown. There's guys that just are too far in their head and they'll throw interceptions. Then you've got the guy that's kind of in the middle. Then you've got the Manning level, a guy that had, the most like fearless man in NFL history, potentially, in Bill Belichick. Go for it on fourth down, okay, when you are risking the entire game, because he doesn't just think he knows that Manning's going to drive down the field, and this is his one shot to get that clutch guy, potentially the best he's ever faced, off the field. That's the clutch that you want. You want that Mahomes level. You want that. I'd even say Josh Allen has a degree of it. So if you can find that, great. But like Derek said, you don't know you've got it until you're in the most unfortunate situation where the guy's got to make a play, and then you kind of figure it out from there. I do love what he said about the athleticism. Like, look, it's so important. You got to be able to move. You can't just be able to stay. You can't stand in the pocket anymore. But there have been just a multitude of guys that came out. They were incredibly athletic. They could run. Couldn't throw for piss. I mean, literally, you know who I'm talking about, Derek. Terrell Pryor. Okay, like Terrell Pryor was arguably one of the most ridiculously athletic quarterbacks I've ever seen in my life. He was so athletic that he became a 1,000-yard receiver for the Cleveland Browns. Okay, so like sometimes athleticism in that case is just blown up. Yeah, you're muted.
It's funny because there was an era of time when Ohio State athletics, when it was just athletes who were quarterbacks at Ohio State, not quarterbacks who were athletes. That's the difference. And everyone always loves to bring that idea up, that they don't look up the fact that these guys weren't actual quarterbacks. They were athletes that were able to throw the football. Braxton Miller, Terrell Pryor, all those names. And look, like the athleticism thing, we can talk about that more. Guys like Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, they all have what I consider the appropriate amount of athleticism. They never use it to take over games, but it is just another level to their game that allows them to be another threat. Lamar Jackson is a threat in and of his own because he is the greatest athlete at quarterback that we have ever seen, and he's improving his passing ability. And he's going to have to continue to do that because he's not going to be the same athlete that he is now 4 years from now. It's not going to be that way. But of course, guys like Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert who are able to evade the pocket, who are able to throw on the run, guys who, when the pocket's collapsing and you're afraid of them throwing, they're able to get that 6-7 yards, go out of bounds, get those 6-7 yards that make it from a 2nd and long to a 3rd and manageable. And that playbook opens up so much more when you have that option. So, just being able to do those, right? Like, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. Even Jalen Hurts is a little more athletic than all those guys, but the Eagles are usually smart about how they approach it with him. They're not looking to run him every other play, but they will use it when they feel they need to, because then it opens things up for you. So it's not about being a, 2-time all-state track athlete out there at quarterback, just enough that you're not like Peyton Manning or what Phillip Rivers was in the pocket for the longest time, right? Like, that's what it is.
Well, and I was going to say that the fact that you brought up Patrick Mahomes is perfect, because even Josh Allen runs like a 4. We're talking about the 40, okay? John Ross, John Ross, who is now, I don't even think he's in the NFL anymore, holds the record for the fastest 40-yard dash, and he couldn't even stay on a starting freaking lineup with the wide receiver needy Cincinnati Bengals. So there's another example that the 40 gets overblown. And to go to your point of like Allen and Mahomes and Burrow, they get out of that pocket and they run like a 4.8 40. Josh Allen's an incredible athlete, don't get me wrong. He is not that fast, though. I mean, he's fast, but he's not like lightning quick, okay? He's just huge, can evade tackles and everything else, and has a sense of where the gap is to get away from tackles. So I absolutely love the breakdown, because there are certain things, obviously, you want the clutch thing, you want the mind, you want the guy who can, everything slows down like Aaron Rodgers style, especially in the AFC, especially with the Colts. Now that he's in the AFC, my goodness, you're talking about a conference.
I know,
you can't get behind it all. You have to nail this quarterback. So I think that the 3 most important are, you do need to have the mental. That's the clutch. That's the breaking down of things. You got to have an innate sense of pocket presence. You just have to have that like third eye somewhere where it's like you can see and feel the pocket. And I love what Derek said about accuracy. I mean, if you're not an accurate quarterback, you can probably figure that out down the road if you're raw enough. But if you're not going to get at least in that 65 to 66% range like the NFL demands now, you could fall behind in a freaking firehouse that's the AFC now. It's terrifying out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like with that, what I would say is like, talk about like the mental game, like the clutch factor, being able to rise to the occasion. Unfortunately, we've seen it the other way with Carson Wentz, where, they kind of, they didn't rise to the occasion and, they missed out on the playoffs. Now, I know it wasn't all his fault, but, like he had a big part in that. He was a leader. He was the guy that they made a captain, and he did not rise to that occasion. So you need a quarterback that's going to do that. It's going to, when the moment gets tough and the moment gets big, it's not too big for them, right? They're able to power through it, and they're able to rise to the occasion, basically. So I think that mental game, and also I think, an underrated thing with the mental game is just knowing where to go with the football in certain situations. Situational IQ, I think, is huge for a quarterback. We saw it so much for Phillip Rivers, where when the pressure was coming, he'd dump it off to Nyheim Hines and get a big gain. Like, just things like that, where you don't always have to necessarily, chuck the ball 30, 40, 50 yards down the field every play, but like, when it's to be smart, and that's a big thing that, like, a reason why Carson Wentz only lasted a year is, he would try to go for the big play too often when there was, the layups, as Chris Ballard called it, that weren't being made. And so, like, just things like that, I think, are important as well for a quarterback to kind of have that balance, when it comes to that. And also when it, talking about the athleticism, knowing when to run, not having that first instinct to take off all the time, right? But like being able to learn, like, okay, there are times when I definitely need to run and get a first down. But there's also times when I need to stay in that pocket and I need to make a big time throw. And so I think kind of having that balance and having that, if you have a quarterback that has that kind of mental toughness, that mental IQ as well, I think all those things really serve a quarterback well in that. And I think that ultimately, guys, comes back to one that I think, just has to be something for a young quarterback is the teachability factor. Like a quarterback has to be able to be taught. Like, with any of these quarterbacks, the Colts are likely going to get, they're going to have things that they were doing that weren't good, right? Whether it's Levis, whether it's Richardson, heck, even CJ Stroud, I'm sure, probably to a lesser degree, but like there's going to be things and going to be kind of things that they picked up and habits that they picked up. The Steichen's going to tell them, hey, cut that out, or you're going to do this differently. And how do you respond to that, criticism? That constructive criticism. How do you take it? Are you willing to be teachable? Are you willing to kind of grow and realize, look, I don't know everything, and I understand that there's guys like Steichen who they know a lot more than me. And so I want to be like a sponge. I want to absorb. I want to learn. I want to admit that I don't have it all figured out, right? And always kind of be like and I think this is just kind of a principle for life, guys, like always be a learner. Always be teachable. I think it's just so critical for anything, especially at the quarterback position, because I think if you learn from guys that know a lot more, that's going to serve you well as opposed to trying to just do it yourself or kind of being like on an island, So I think for those factors, those are kind of big ones for me as well, kind of playing off from what you guys said as well.
Situational IQ, I thought that was a really good one.
That was awesome.
Kind of just goes into the thing with the clutch gene as well in some ways. But I mean, and that's the thing, Cody, is the problem is that with almost probably all these quarterbacks, when you brought up the idea of the Phillip Rivers thing, well, that came with Phillip Rivers, who's been in the league for almost 20 years. Like that is a reason why a guy like that was able to survive in the league for 17 years as a quarterback, because he was smart enough to understand that and was so dedicated to the game of football that he understood that. And Steichen has said it so much. Who is dedicated to this game the most? Like, of all of these quarterbacks, who are we confident that we're going to go in there and get, and they are going to soak up all of that information and they will live, breathe, and die football? That's it. That's what we want, is a guy that is going to be all about it. We don't want half-ass stuff. We want stuff that everyone is going to buy into. And it's important for the quarterback, because if your quarterback is like that, then the rest of your team is going to end up like that. But the problem we're going to have is this fan base is immediately going to want this quarterback, whoever we get, to have that situational awareness, when the problem is I truly believe there are only two quarterbacks that have that kind of situational awareness, and that's Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. And even then, I still question both of their ability to understand a situational awareness when it comes to that sort of prospect, because, Richardson's so young. He's got a lot to learn. Even Will Levis, with trusting his arm too much, that's something he's going to have to learn, is like, hey, we know your arm is strong, but you got to know that when that throw is not there, you got to do the other opposite way. So, half this draft class has to learn that situational awareness, and the other half that has it still needs to improve it even more. So, it's unfortunate, because in year one, we're not going to see that, but we're going to hear this fan base say that a lot. And that's going to be very annoying.
Yeah, there's a quality that I thought of, like, once Derek kind of brought up, you got to have a guy that's, really he also kind of like said a leader, as somebody who's actually going to step into the leadership role. You got to have a guy that's going to get that locker room back to square one. I mean, that was a team you go from having guys that would punish you if you even touched Andrew Luck, touched Jacoby Brissett, touched Phillip Rivers, even to an extent Carson Wentz, to a team that allowed Kayvon Thibodeau to dance around your fledgling quarterback, and then the next time that Daniel Jones gets hit accidentally by Bobby Okereke, you see the Giants linemen run over there and attack him like wolves. You got to get somebody back there in the locker room that's going to get that team back to square one. And it leads me to an interesting example that I thought of with the Jets. The reason they have Aaron Rodgers is because Zach Wilson couldn't pan out. Okay, Zach Wilson was one of the most impressive prospects at the combine. His pro day was immaculate. The guy had all the tools, all the athleticism. But then he lost the locker room to the point where the team was chanting for Mike White. Okay, so you need a guy who's not going to falter. He's going to stand. He's going to stand strong. I personally think all four of these guys have a case in different ways. See, I think like since Derek is a CJ Stroud guy, he's more of the calm. I'm going to show the results on the field. Follow me. Kind of the quiet leader. Bryce Young's more of the experience. Will Levis would be the fiery guy, the guy that would get in your face and tell you how it is. And Anthony Richardson might just be more of like the kind of laid back type of dude. I mean, they each have their own way I think they can lead, which makes it even more interesting just to think about each one of these guys in a Colts uniform.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the interesting thing, I think that's a good segue, Drake. Like looking at these, we'll say the three prospects that could potentially be there, because I think it's pretty safe to say, unless something crazy happens, Bryce Young's not going to the Colts. But there's three possibilities, I think, realistically for the Colts: C.J. Stroud, Will Levis, and Anthony Richardson. And so I kind of wanted to ask you guys and kind of get your overall thoughts on some of these things that we talked about, and kind of compare and contrast and say, like, which traits are true of these guys? Which traits would we say, maybe these guys lack or they need more experience in, or whatever it is, and kind of just break these guys down by prospects. So I wanted to start with CJ Stroud, talk about him, some of the things that he does well, some of the traits that we talked about that he possesses, some of the things maybe that he doesn't possess, or maybe he needs to work on getting better in, and just go from there and talk about these three guys before the draft comes in a couple days here. So let's start with CJ Stroud, and we'll start with Drake. What are some things, man, you think for CJ Stroud?
Well, to make it, because I could talk about CJ Stroud all day, but there is somebody who I believe is a certified CJ Stroud expert in the room, so I will keep this brief. I think that to make it brief, positives, negatives, like things that this guy, we'll just say what he can improve on. I think that it's just two things for me, because it's really hard to break. It's really, and the S2 thing, just ignore that.
It was
stupidity.
It was fake. It was 100% fake.
Very, very, very smoky. But I think that he's going to have to prove he's mobile enough for an NFL speed. Look, I know the Georgia game. I understand that was a quote unquote NFL level defense. It's still not the NFL. He's going to have to show that in real time. The mobility is not an issue. I don't think it is, but he's still going to have to show it. And going back to the mental part of, when the game's on the line, he showed it in the Georgia game. We always reference the Georgia game. He's going to have to show it consistently. If he starts 17 games for an NFL franchise, probably 5 or 6 of those games, he's going to have to show he can make a last-second throw, especially with divisional games. They're just so tight. There's not a lot of blowouts. But my goodness, to make it brief on the positives, he is arguably the most natural passer. His mechanics are very hard to judge in a negative manner. His footwork's nice. Everything releases through his hands so smooth. And like Derek said, there's not a throw he can't make, not a spot on the field that his receivers can't catch that ball. I mean, man, if you want accuracy, that's without question. I don't think it's really – I think Young's pretty close, but, man, within a couple of years, if Stroud works out, he could be hitting like 73, 74% of his passes.
I think that one aspect of CJ Stroud that, a lot of people don't quite get because they maybe just don't follow him as much is he is a lot like what Justin Fields is. And that's more of the like Drake said before, which was, that quiet, I'm going to let my actions speak. I'm not really the guy that's going to, have these pump up motivational speeches, get in your face kind of guy. I'm not like that. I'm more of just I'm going to go out there. I'm going to put my all on the football field. I'm going to let it be the end. And, at times that has gotten guys like Justin Fields in trouble because when you're not good at deflecting blame to the right person, and when you're not good at accepting failure, and when you're not good at being in that situation and then being forced to listen to these reporters and these fans and everyone else just mock you for something that's almost out of your control, it's tough to be able to respond to that. Justin Fields has been under, a lot of scrutiny for that, for, how he's conducted himself sometimes with the media and his words. I fear that in a way for CJ Stroud at times, just because he's not a It's not a great, I wouldn't even say he's not even a great public speaker. He's a great person when you're talking to him and somebody that he knows. I don't know how he's going to lead the locker room. I mean, I don't think it should be a problem just because everyone that's talked with him knows that he's a great guy. So I don't see why that's an issue, but I do think that it can be a thing where, you're in a locker room with a bunch of grown men, and so this isn't college. Not everyone's the same age. You're going to be with guys that are that have been in the league for 10 plus years. So, you're going to be the new guy on the block. Doesn't matter if you're the quarterback, you're the rookie. You got to be the one that leads this. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And there are a few things from a throwing standpoint, people were saying it, and with the pressure thing, I again think that's another thing that is completely widely overblown. I do believe that is something that he's going to have to work with, but I think it's just hilarious that like people want to try to make a quarterback out to be bad when his team is putting him in a bad position. Therefore, he has to be the one that overcomes it instead of making the rest of the team do better, right? Like, I mean, everyone says the same thing. If there's a clean pocket, the quarterback that will make the throw more times than everyone else, any person that you would ask, they would say CJ Stroud. And that's the important aspect here is he's the accurate guy. He's the quote unquote safe guy. The guy that that when he comes in, he's going to be accurate. You just got to give him a little bit of time to get with these guys. And, especially being with Indianapolis, you got these big wide receivers, right? Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, Jelani Woods. You got these big body guys that, you can throw the ball up to. And we know CJ Stroud loves to throw them 50-50 balls. And, with the athletic ability and the size that the Indianapolis Colts have, it would fit perfectly for the kind of throwing style that CJ Stroud has to not really, elaborate too much more on what Drake said. But yeah, those are what I think is something he needs to improve on, things that he does well.
Gotcha. All right, let's move on to Will Levis now.
Okay.
I'll kick this one off. I think that the negatives, just watching him at the combine, there are some throwing mechanic stuff, especially with his left side. He tends to like lock his feet. His footwork will need some kind of touching up for sure. But something that was interesting that Daniel Jeremiah said is that there's times where his upper body does not match his lower body. He's such an athlete. He's a freakish athlete. Dude's ridiculous. All right. But he doesn't match the athleticism with his throwing motions, which sometimes you'll get these balls where it's like, it's a 5-yard out. You just got to put that thing on the money. Well, Will Levis will beam your head with that football because his mechanics are not lined up. He's throwing way too hard, and you're going to get receivers that are going to get pissed off at that kind of stuff. So he's going to have to, I mean, like you said, Derek, these are NFL guys. They're like, get me the ball, man. I'm a $15 to $20 million a year guy. Who are you? Get me the ball. Like, I'm going to make your career. Like, these are guys that they're not going to take that stuff. So he's going to have to fix that kind of stuff. Not saying he's going to get yelled at, but he's going to have to improve the throwing mechanics. Like Derek said earlier, he can't just trust his arm. A lot of strong arm guys will just throw that ball. They'll be like, well, I was able to do this in college. I don't have any other option. I got to throw this ball. That's even what Chris Ballard said is that, people tend to fall back on what are their strengths. So he's going to have to kind of get better at reading defenses and not making bad throws. But I think that on the positives, you're getting he gets kind of buried underneath Anthony Richardson. Okay. This is a guy that is absolutely an athlete. This is a guy that can make those vertical throws that Shane Steichen talks about. He can make explosive plays happen. He can punish a defense with his feet. He can get better in the pocket. Also, it's both a pro and a con. He will take one on the jaw anytime you want him to. He will not leave that pocket. He is tough. He's war ready. The dude's a real baller. I think that he can go out there and be what Carson Wentz could have been if everything works out. But at the other end of it, it'll be interesting. He's definitely a wild card, but I think the biggest thing about him is he gets that ball out quick. There's no shortage of velocity on those throws. And in the quick passing game, RPOs and stuff, oh man, I think he could really tear up a defense with the right mechanics.
I truly hate the comparison of him and Carson Wentz. I hate it because I think that they're different kinds of quarterbacks. And of course, everyone wants to talk about what Carson Wentz became because of the situations that he was put in. Mentally, he never recovered. And that messed him up from a football career standpoint, and it will for the rest of his life. That's unfortunate. But to say that same thing about Will Levis is ridiculous. I liked what Dan Orlovsky went on ESPN and said his comp is more like Josh Allen in a lot of different ways. They're the exact same body type. They play the exact same way, got rockets of an arm, can use their athleticism when they want to. They stay in the pocket and they throw the ball hard. And the thing is when you talk about Will Levis, people always want to go back to the numbers. Always want to go back to the numbers. His numbers were trash. His numbers were trash. He's trash. End of story. The problem is nobody wants to take it at face value what his problem were when the fact that, one, he had nobody on that team this year that is going to get drafted besides him. No one. And the difference is, you know who also had that problem in college? That was Josh Allen in Wyoming. And you know what the crazy part is not the fact Josh Allen was not playing Will Levis competition. Okay, Will Levis was playing Alabama defense, Georgia defense, playing against Tennessee, who can score the lights out on anyone, right? To try to keep up with that is ridiculous, right? Like, the problem is if you took Will Levis junior year film versus and put him in this year's draft class, then there would be no questioning on whether or not Will Levis would be a top 4 quarterback in this draft class. But you have people that are sitting here saying, oh, he's not even worth a 5th round draft pick. Like, you people are crazy. Like, the problem is Will Levis got hurt last year. He had no help. He had no offensive scheme. And there's so many things piled up against him, but never once did he complain. Never once did he back down. He played through the injuries, even though he could barely throw the football anymore and could barely stand in the pocket because he was getting hit sacked 36 times in 11 games. Come on, people. Like, we got to have more compassion for this. Not everyone is Andrew Luck. Not everyone can get sacked 50 times and still throw for 4,000 yards, throw for 30 plus touchdowns, throw only 10 interceptions, and make the grace of God just look easy. Like, not everyone can do that. Andrew Luck was a generational guy. We're not sitting here saying Will Levis is the same, but the problem is people want to ride him off without looking at everything that he has. And the other thing is he's dedicated, man. Ever since the season ended, he went to California and went and got to working on his mechanics. He basically went and got another 10 pounds of lean muscle mass on him. So now he's 230 and he's a lot more muscle now. He's been dedicated to getting things ready and right for this time. I think he's got a good head on him. He's smart. He's been around good people. He has a good network. He's a guy that wants to play football. And I think that's the important aspect here. He may be more of a project than a CJ Stroud or a Bryce Young, but at the end of the day, he is a kid that has all the intangibles you want in a franchise quarterback. It's just a matter of, do the Colts think that he has the right intangibles and is he worth investing into? That's the important part. But I think he has all the necessary things to be able to be a good quarterback. It's just a matter of, does he actually do it?
Hey, real quick, you know who else went to California and got work on their mechanics? Josh Allen. So there's another comp, and he went from like 55% and trying to do underhanded throws in the wild card round against the Houston Texans to, dueling it out with Patrick Mahomes. I mean, so it could be done. It could be done. He's definitely got the drive. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, definitely. It's so interesting. And I say this as somebody who, and we'll get into the next guy here, but as somebody who, if I look at these prospects, like, I would say like Levis out of the 3 guys, for me personally, is the guy that I would least like to see. Not that I would be mad. I would certainly be excited. I would back him totally if the Colts decided to go that direction. But I think it's just interesting that, like, people are willing to pick and choose kind of what they like and what they don't like, in a prospect. Like the same people that would say Will Levis was trash last year are looking at Anthony Richardson and are saying this dude's the next coming, and he very well may be, but like the stats aren't that much better, like, so it's just kind of funny. It's like, well, if you're gonna stick to stats, like be consistent at least, like if you're gonna
Will
say
Levis threw, what was it, 9% better on his throws with a messed up shoulder than Anthony Richardson did. I'm just saying, 9%.
He played through hell last year with
Tore
no
up his
consistency, no
shoulder
weapons,
and
bad
messed
coaching.
up a leg.
Yeah, still had a winning record. So
yeah, and I get it. Like Levis is not a perfect prospect. He certainly has things that are flaws for him. He needs to work on. He's going to have to fix. But like, I do think the Will Levis hate is just way too overblown, in my opinion. Even if he's not my number one or number two guy here, like I still see a lot of positives and a lot of things where I'm like, if he works with the right coach, he could turn into a really good quarterback. So, it's just interesting how people pick and choose how stats matter for this guy, but stats don't matter for that guy. It's interesting how that works out. But anyway, we'll move on to Anthony Richardson now. Obviously, we know the kind of talent this guy is. We know the kind of arm he has. We know he broke all those combine records. I mean, the dude is just like a walking like specimen, like the RAS score of a 10. Like he is just off the charts when it comes to that stuff. But he is extremely raw. He played in 13 games last year for Florida and, had some ups, had some downs, but I think a lot of people are basing this similar to, like you talked about with Josh Allen, like they're projecting what the talent could be for a guy like Anthony Richardson. I think we would say out of all the quarterbacks, this dude clearly has the highest ceiling, but the question is, could he ever reach that ceiling? Like, is that actually a thing that's going to happen? Because right now, I think out of the three potential quarterbacks, he's certainly the most raw. He's certainly the guy that's going to take a lot more time. He's not as NFL ready as some of the other guys that the Colts could potentially get. But, and I guess the question the Colts are going to have to ask themselves is, is it worth betting on the traits? Is it worth betting on the athletic ability of Anthony Richardson? Is it worth betting on that and betting that he can reach his ceiling? And that if you take him and you take a little bit more of a risk and maybe you don't start him right away, are you going to look back at a couple of years and say, yeah, he wasn't ready, but it was worth it because we were able to get more out of him, right? Especially like we talked about with how stacked the AFC is right now. Like this dude his ceiling is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Like I really do think that is the case. So what are your guys' thoughts here on Anthony Richardson out of Florida?
Well, I'll start with this one. I think, and this is just me spitballing here. I don't know this for a fact, but this is my perception of this from, talking with guys like Landon, talking with, a couple other people who have done a deeper dive into Anthony Richardson on a personal level. I think of every single one of these quarterbacks, Anthony Richardson is the most dedicated to the game of football. Me personally, I think that he would be the biggest sponge of all of these guys when it comes to information. He is a diehard. He is a guy that is very passionate about a lot of different things, and that comes from his upbringing and where he comes from. And then on top of it, he's going to be 21 when he gets into the league, right? So, very, very young. This is a guy you could sit for 2 years and would still be the same age as the incoming draft class of 2025, and he would be the same age as them, So it's kind of funny, like he's so young. It's ridiculous, right? Like, I mean, whatever team he goes to, it would be a phenomenal situation for them because, you're talking about a guy that can, do it all. And I think that's the wild card aspect of it is Shane Steichen sitting back and saying like, okay, Chris, I want Richardson because I think of all of these guys, I can get the most out of him. I think that he's not the best one right now. He's probably the worst one right now, but give me a year to get this guy some proper coaching and watch this guy blossom. Because like you said, Cody, there are people that literally think that Anthony Richardson could be the next like Patrick Mahomes, God level, top tier, number one quarterback that's ever played the game of football sort of talent, just due to the fact he's the most athletic quarterback that we've ever seen come into the league. And he's still so young and so raw. If he got really good, if he started to, get that proper coaching and, got better at his consistency, then that would be something that we could really see blossom. And, especially for the Colts, right? If you're wanting to see if Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor in the backfield does not pique your interest, then I don't know what to tell you. That's deadly to think about that. But that's the biggest issue with Anthony Richardson is the consistency. I think he makes better throws than Will Levis does even on occasion, but I think Will Levis makes more consistent throws. And instead you see, Anthony Richardson miss on plenty of easy throws because, like with Will Levis, the mechanics just aren't there. And that has the problem with he didn't have a quarterback coach at Florida. So it's kind of one of those situations where he wasn't getting very great coaching. And not a lot of great talent there either. Right now, a lot of those players are come and gone. Anthony Richardson was the offense for Florida. So at the end of the day, he's just a raw prospect, man. I mean, he is, like you said, his ceiling is as high as he wants it to go. But the problem is his floor. If he doesn't do that, then, you wasted a first round draft pick on a guy that you should have just gotten later.
Yeah. I'll take a different approach at it because everybody knows the positive. Everyone talks about, the athleticism and stuff. So just to keep that brief, obviously he's incredibly athletic. He's got an arm that can hit anywhere on the field. I do think that he is a little bit more ready to read NFL defenses. He's got great eye manipulation on linebackers and secondary. I mean, he's learning. He had to learn a lot of that stuff on the fly with guys that would drop 2 out of every 10 passes that hit their hands in Florida. I mean, these guys truly dropped passes at an alarming rate. But something that's interesting is him and Will Levis are so dang similar. I mean, they really are. Both are athletic guys. Obviously, Richardson is the most athletic, but they're both athletic guys. They both are tough. They're dedicated. They have had to improve immensely. They're both raw. Obviously, Levis has had a couple more years in a pro offense, but now you're talking about they both dealt with really interesting coaching situations. They both had pretty bad teams and had to play Superman ball. They are both they're just a little bit of athleticism on Richardson's side and more accuracy on Levis's side, away from being damn near the same guy. So they're very similar. So I will say the negatives though, those are more important to talk about. He's going to have to get the mechanics down. Obviously 53% is that's regardless of drops, that is really intense. That's a very low percentage. There was one game, I think he was like 3 for 13, and obviously someone broke down film. The routes weren't ran correctly. A couple drops, 3 for 13.
What was it? The Florida State game? He finished like 9 of 27
for
160 yards. So he finished with 33%.
Yeah, and like you said, like that's something else is something I've asked, and I'll, because we've talked quarterbacks so much. This is something I haven't even brought up. Is like I've thought to myself, what happens if they just throw him in? They're like, all right, Gardner, go ahead and sit, mentor him. What would the work like? What could a first year? Let's just hypothetically say Anthony Richardson plays all 17 games. I just wrote a piece hypothetically saying all top 5 guys. How would everything pan out in their first year if they played 17 games for the Colts and started? I had Bryce Young at 10-7, Stroud at 8-9, Levis at 8-9, Hendon Hooker at 3-14. Sorry, anyway. Hendon Hooker is not. He's not a day one starter.
Thank you. Somebody else,
just not. I had Anthony Richardson at 6-11, and I do think that maybe 7-10. You'd have a guy that would make some crazy plays. Okay, But man, you'd have to run the ball quite a bit. You'd probably have to like kind of mix in Zach Moss, Deion Jackson, maybe a scat back you draft. You're going to need to get the ball to Isaiah. I said in the article, Isaiah McKenzie and Jelani Woods, they would both be his best friend, the quick out and the big target.
When it comes to Anthony Richardson, you would see the biggest jump from the beginning part of his season to the end.
Yep.
The beginning part of the season would be hell. It'd be hell to watch.
I think it'd be rough.
The kid would be completing like maybe just over 50% of his passes, probably throwing about the same number of interceptions as touchdowns, probably. But then the last 6 games of the year, when you see him playing, then you start to see him dial in a little more. And you start seeing that 2 touchdown to 1 interception ratio, completing around 60%, that sort of thing. That would be a lot more of the Anthony Richardson. But I'm just saying, Anthony Richardson is the perfect guy to sit for a year behind a quarterback that you have. The problem is the Colts don't have one of those because Matt Ryan decided to take a dump on his entire career this last year and decided to just suck. Okay, that was the key. That was the golden ticket. We were going to say Matt Ryan was going to sit there and was going to be like, okay, we get one more year out of you, Matty Ice. Teach this young kid, Anthony Richardson, how to play quarterback. And then next year, when he learns a little more, then he'll be ready for the NFL once he gets a little bit more speed. But unfortunately, with Anthony Richardson, the problem is there's not a spot in the top 4 in which he's going to have that issue, where he's going to have that. If he gets drafted to the Texans or to the Colts, God forbid the freaking Carolina Panthers somehow, then you're going to have to play him. You're going to have to play him. If he went to like Seattle or something, he could sit for 2 years behind Geno Smith. And then, when Geno's last year of his contract's up, start throwing in Anthony Richardson, because Anthony Richardson's only going to be 23 years old and he's still going to be on his rookie deal. So, I mean, that would be a great situation for him.
Raiders too.
Yeah, the Raiders too. Yeah, the Raiders. Absolutely. Jimmy G. It's just a matter of whether or not he gets there. Now, do the Raiders try to trade up to number 3 to go and get him?
Titans.
And that could be some of those teams where I think, like, if the Houston Texans don't take a quarterback and a team trades up to number 3, I'm more inclined to think that a certain amount of teams would want to trade for Anthony Richardson instead of CJ Stroud because of that specific reason. Because if you're the Raiders, with the fact that you have Jimmy Garoppolo for 2 years and you just have all that time in the world to mold Anthony Richardson into the quarterback that you want, you're not going to do that same thing with CJ Stroud. Stroud's not a guy you're sitting for, 2 years, because you're going to make CJ Stroud worse by having him sit, versus Anthony Richardson, who would be the opposite. So, be interesting.
Very fair. Very fair.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. All these guys, it's just, like you talked about, the 2 guys are kind of similar, but Stroud's a little bit different, where he would be definitely a guy that you would jump out there, throw out there day one, and he would just, go to work. Now, I guess the question for the Colts is, like, can they afford to wait on an Anthony Richardson? Like, can they afford to sit there and wait 1, 2, 3 years on Richardson to develop, or is the move more of a guy that can be an instant starter, can play from day one and just kind of learn on the fly, kind of get thrown into the fire a little bit? Yeah, it may not be always pretty. It may be some struggles early on, but they do feel like, that's the way that they're going to grow with this guy, is just let him go in and play.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say this. I think if they're looking if they think in 1 year, I think that the Colts, if they knew 1 year, they probably can't wait 2 or 3. Would they? Maybe. But I think if it was 1 year, they'd be like, all right, Anthony Richardson, fantastic. But if they're trying to hit the ground running, I've even said this. Yes, Bryce Young's the most NFL-ready quarterback. All right. Okay, if he's over 6 feet tall, he's the consensus number 1 pick, whatever. CJ Stroud and his accuracy and his footwork and pocket presence, mixed with Shane Steichen, mixed with Isaiah McKenzie, mixed with Jelani Woods, Jonathan Taylor, Alec Pearson, Michael Pittman Jr., and potentially Jonathan freaking Mingo. Okay. I mean, that kind of stuff right there tells me that that's accuracy. I think that the accuracy would win out in that. I think that he would hit the ground running fastest for the Colts out of any of the quarterbacks.
Here's the thing when it comes to the people talking about Anthony Richardson sitting or not sitting. And a lot of people like to mention the Patrick Mahomes thing. Here's the problem I have with that.
That's a way better team.
Patrick
dude.
Mahomes in college played 32 games. Played 32 games as a starter for Texas Tech. 32. That is 2.5 full years of playing college football. So this guy, he came in with a lot more experience, a lot of experience. Played 32 games. That's basically 2 full seasons of playing NFL quarterback stuff. So, I mean, he had that game experience, but him being able to sit and soak in all the information helped him because he already had so much playing experience. Playing quarterback was not an issue for him. It was just soaking all of the Andy Reid stuff into his head, right? But Anthony Richardson's only played 13 games. 13. Like, the problem with him sitting is the fact that he's not going to improve mentally or physically by sitting and waiting a whole year, maybe 2 years to play when the guy has only played in 13 games. There's only so much he can take in with sitting. He has to learn on the fly. He has to get that game experience. He has to, because you can sit somebody and have them learn a different way if they have that experience, like Patrick Mahomes did. He played in 30 plus games. He's used to playing, and it's not an issue for him. But Anthony Richardson's not used to playing quarterback yet. He hasn't played that much at a high level. So you have to get him to play more at a high level to catch up to the game speed. I mean, at some point, it might take him 2 years to get to where we start to see him really skyrocket in the production that we think he can get to. But that's the risk you have to take. You have to understand when you take Anthony Richardson that for your first year of him playing, or even 2 years, he is going to struggle. He is going to struggle. But it is, can you be patient enough and stay committed to him enough that in years 3 or 4, then you start seeing the Anthony Richardson that everyone thinks he can be. But the mental aspect of it is not about sitting. It is about him going out there and getting game reps because he doesn't have those yet.
It's a good point. It's a great point.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be certainly interesting to see which direction the Colts go. Do they take more of the wait and see with Richardson and, knowing that it's going to be a little bit longer? Maybe they, if CJ Stroud's sitting there at 4, they decide we're not going to overthink this. We're going to get the guy that's going to make us better today and maybe not in a year or 2, but he's going to make us better today. And also, I think we talk about all this potential with guys, those 2 guys, Levis and Richardson. But like CJ Stroud can still get better too. Like, he still has a lot he can grow in. And, he doesn't. I think the thing is, like, people look at Richardson and he's so like raw that they see the potential and they're like, man, this guy could, he has all this potential, but he also has so much more room to grow than CJ Stroud because CJ Stroud's just so much of a better player at this current time. And I just think, like, when you look at CJ Stroud's flaws versus Anthony Richardson's, I mean, like, you can nitpick a lot more with CJ Stroud than you do with Richardson, where the flaws are very clear and up front. But like, Stroud can still get bigger. He can still develop some things in his game. And I really do think that would be a best case scenario for the Colts is CJ Stroud. Because I do feel like he can be a really, really good quarterback in this league with the right system. And I really think he's a guy that, he has proven to be a leader. He has proven to be a winner. And he's proven that he can do stuff in the clutch. And also he can use his legs as well. So he does fit that kind of mold. And he is a good size for a quarterback. So I think all those things. And I do think, I'm sure you guys have heard this, right? People say, oh, he played at Ohio State. He had all these number 1 receivers, which is true. But then you look at a guy, I know I heard this same argument for Joe Burrow. And I'm not saying he's Joe Burrow, but like that's what I heard. He had all these receivers at LSU. He had all these weapons. But Joe Burrow came out and he still played really good football. So, I mean, I think that could be a situation where you say, is it another Joe Burrow situation? Or is it a situation where it actually is legit? And then, if he doesn't have those kind of receivers at the NFL level, does that impact him? I personally am always going to be like, until proven wrong, I'm going to bet that he's going to continue that success into the NFL.
Well, I mean, you got to think that those receivers are also kind of NFL level receivers. So maybe the argument should be that CJ Stroud might get used to quicker throwing to NFL level receivers than other quarterbacks.
Why do we need quarterbacks to struggle with no help in order to give them a benefit of the doubt? It's just trying to make an excuse. Just trying to make an excuse.
All Ohio State quarterbacks, Derek, they suck.
Would rather have a guy struggle, never do well, and just say, "Oh, well, he didn't have help," versus the guy who had help, had those good things, and say, "Oh, well, that's just because he had help." It's like, oh, okay. Well, based off that logic, why don't all of you want Will Levis then? I mean, Will Levis ain't never had help. I mean, that's literally the truth. So, again, why is everybody why ain't everybody want Will Levis if that's the case? I mean, if it matters with who the guy has wide receivers up. I mean, again, we never talk about it when it comes to Alabama quarterbacks. We never talk about it when it came to Joe Burrow. We talk about all these things. It only matters when it's an Ohio State quarterback. It only matters when it's an Ohio State quarterback. Everybody else doesn't matter. It's only when it's an Ohio State quarterback do people care when they actually have legit NFL wide receivers on that roster. And it's just simply because Brian Hartline has had a dozen of them come out of that university into the NFL over the last 5 years, because every year Columbus has 2 wide receivers going in the top first round of the draft every year. I mean, it's just because he's that good. It's not our fault we get elite wide receivers. Get better, everyone else.
There you go. You can cover them, right? That's awesome.
Yeah,
we're going off on a tangent here. We're going away from the video.
Yeah, that's all right. We're closing in on an hour, guys. We haven't done an hour video in a long time, so this is great. I love this. I love being able to talk about all this because, I mean, this is probably like the last time we're going to be able to talk about the Colts getting to quarterback, hopefully for a long time. It's going to be interesting, but my kind of thing is I don't have an issue if you don't believe in this quarterback because of this reason or whatever, or if you have issues with this, but just be consistent in your argument. That's all I ask. So, it's going to be interesting to see which route the Colts do go at quarterback, right? Which guy do they believe is their guy? How much of that, talk about the S2 test and all that stuff, how much of that is legitimate? How much of that is smoke? And all that stuff. And do the Colts overthink it, or do they just go for it? And they just get the guy that's the clear number one. Do they go for the guy that is clearly ready to play now, or the guy where you bet on the traits? Steichen is going to have a huge influence on that, and I'm really intrigued to see which route they do go. And I think, honestly, out of any of these 3 quarterbacks at the end of the day, guys, I think knowing Shane Steichen and his track record, he's going to develop these guys into a good quarterback. So you can have your preference, but at the end of the day, I think we'll all be happy with either of these 3 quarterbacks that the Colts do go get. And it can't be any worse than last year. And as I've said before, if you're going to stink, if these quarterbacks stink year one, I'd rather do it with a young guy than do it with a 38-year-old quarterback. So,
and then a 37-year-old, and then a 24-year-old, I think.
Right. Exactly. It's a totally different feel. Yes. It would be a totally different feel at this point next year if we're sitting here in the top 5 again, because obviously you have a guy that you believe in and a guy that you can build around finally. The Colts just haven't had that in so long. So, all right, cool. I think that'll wrap it up, guys. Just a little bit under an hour here talking about different quarterback traits, the physical, obviously, the mental, everything else there in terms of the things looking for quarterback, the things we thought maybe were a little bit overrated for different quarterbacks, although they are important as well. Man, Drake, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's always a pleasure. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, find your work, and everything?
On horseshoehuddle.com, at Colts FN on Twitter, and just recently joined Apple Podcast. So find us on there too. But yeah, it's just a crazy time. It's only 3 more days, and then I have a feeling that the news will spike for a day, and then it's going to be kind of calm waters for a week because it has just been hellfire and brimstone.
Absolutely. Well, guys, be sure to go check him out and everybody over there on horseshoehuddle.com. They do great work for the Indianapolis Colts. And everybody, I hope you guys have a great draft weekend. It is honestly a holiday for a lot of us that cover the Colts year round, and it's one of our favorite times of year. And so hopefully you guys will join us. We're going to be doing all 3 days, we're going to be live streaming. So be sure to check that out, guys. It's going to be a ton of fun just hanging out with you guys. And, hey, the Colts actually have a top pick this year. This is something they've never had in the history of this podcast. So it's going to be a ton of fun. But thanks, guys, for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And as always, guys, go Colts.